All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of Ask the Expert with the Martin Eiden team. Today is very exciting because we have a rotational guest host, my husband and amazing team member, Sean Wilson. Say hi to the crowd, Sean.
Hello, crowd.
There's a side note. I always pretend I'm interviewing Sean as if he's a celebrity, and I'm like, say hi to the crowd, Sean. And he's like, hi, crowd. And I'm very excited to have a dear friend and an expert in giving of yourself and time with charity. It's Reginald Grayson. And Sean, I'm going to let you take it away as you're the guest host, and I'll be the perennial sidekick laughing at all the jokes.
Well, thank everyone for joining us today. It is always a privilege for me to have the opportunity to host the show, and even more of a privilege for me to bring someone on that I care deeply about, who's also doing something extremely wonderful for the community in which he lives and making the world a better place. So without further ado, I would like to introduce to you one of my dearest friends, Mr. Reginald Grayson. Hello, Reginald.
Hi.
So I have to say right off the bat, thank you for doing this. It's always awesome to speak with someone, especially someone you care so deeply about, and someone, it's nice for me to shine a light on someone who's doing something spectacular for the community. So I want to start by just briefly talking about your background. I mean, we're both from the South. If you can tell us where you're from and just something brief about your childhood.
Oh, wow. Thank you. I love you, Sean. So this is it's a pleasure for me to do it. I am from Huntsville, Alabama, originally, and I grew up in I think a very sort of, Sean and I have talked about this a lot, somewhat traditional kind of working class, pretending to be middle class, Black family in Huntsville. My father was a professor, my mom was a teacher. They're both retired, but my dad also was a representative in the Alabama State House of Representatives. So I learned a lot early on about sort of serving the community and fighting for justice and things like that. So he was always very much involved in the community in that way, in different ways.
I didn't know that about your family, that he was in the, you said Alabama State House of Representatives?
In fact, he was the first Black person represented to the Alabama State House since Reconstruction.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's very impressive.
And there were other things too, like the way where our house was in the city of Huntsville, there was the county land right behind us. And at one point, they decided to build a prison right behind our house. So it was a subdivision, and my university, Alabama A&M University, and an elementary school, all within like half a mile of this prison, and there was no community input. So that was one of the first times my father sort of led this effort to, say, no, we need to have our voices heard. The community, this is important, for this our community. So it was through things like that, just by example. He never sat us down and, said, go serve. It was just by example.
Well, Reginald, let me just ask, do you think he was setting the example for you to do this later in your life, or that's just who he was?
It's just who he is. And my parents are also very involved in the church, and the church did, different things, did and does different things for the community. They tithe, they're very, committed to that. I think that, my father studied biology. He has a PhD in biology. And so he had other opportunities, just to work in the private sector. But for him, historically Black colleges and universities were very important, and his commitment there was resolute. So he forewent all of those opportunities and chose to stay at Alabama A&M because he thought it was important. He actually built a pre-med program at the college. So when I was growing up in Huntsville, there were no Black dentists. And then by the time I left, there were 3 or 4, and they all had gone through my dad's pre-med program and then gone on, on to medical school. So yes, I don't think he was consciously sort of, I think they wanted us to be happy in our careers. So whatever that meant, that's kind of the way they talked about it.
So we will lead, all of this is leading up to your service and what you're doing currently, but I just want to hit on HBCUs because they're getting so much attention now. You attended one. Do you think that made a difference in who you are today? You also attended NYU. We will talk about that. But do you think it made a difference in who you are today attending an HBCU?
Yes. So again, I went to Alabama A&M University. It was literally about maybe a half a mile from my house. My parents were there, my brother, my cousins, aunts, uncles. So it was in my family. I actually went to kindergarten at the Alabama A&M Early Childhood Education Center. So I grew up knowing that I would go to college, just as we all sort of know you go from 9th grade to 10th grade. Going to college was never a question for me. And it was only actually in my senior year of high school that I realized not everyone sort of grew up with that understanding, that it was a big question mark for some people and some people weren't going to go. But for me, it was never a question. I sort of resisted going initially because I wanted to go away to college, or I thought I did anyway. But I wound up going, and it was good for me because in that environment, you don't have to sort of think about some of the other things that, you
I'm going to chime in, Sean. Can you explain what
HBCU is?
HBCU historical?
Thank you, Martin, because I'm talking to a friend and I know you're absolutely right.
So HBC.
But let me just also say they're getting a lot of press now because
Well,
Kamala
can you please
Harris.
Define what it is so we know what you're talking about? Thank you.
Go ahead.
HBCU is a historically Black college or university. So we say historically because today, obviously, no school can open up and say we are a Black college and no one else can get in or anything like that. But at the time that these institutions were founded, most other universities specifically forbade entrance to Black students. So these universities were founded to educate Black students because those were the only options. So that's why we use the term historically Black colleges and universities.
And they're also referred to as the Divine Nine?
No, the Divine Nine refers to the fraternity and sorority system.
Okay, you're right. That's right.
So that's a big part. I think it's a little different at HBCUs, or Divine Nines exist at other colleges and universities too. But in the Black community, they go beyond college. So my mother, for example, is a Delta. And as an adult, if you are involved in your organization, you continue to do service works, for the rest of your life. So it's not just a college thing.
All right, so that's a great explanation of historically Black colleges and universities. So I want to just jump forward a little bit. From there was your springboard into NYU, and you decided to go to NYU. And can you just tell me about what you studied and why the decision to go to NYU of all of the places? Why not go back to a historically Black college to complete your studies?
So I'll say first that my undergraduate degree at Alabama A&M was in urban planning, and there's not a whole lot of urban in Alabama, so it was sort of preordained that I would leave Alabama. I didn't really have any particular goal to come to New York. Unlike you, I wasn't an actor or anything like that, but I won a fellowship. It's called the New York City Urban Fellows Program. It's pretty prestigious for people interested in public service and government in particular. So that was my ticket to New York. And then I worked here for 2 or 3 years before I went back to graduate school. And my second degree was a master's of science in real estate development and investment at NYU. And I got that degree at a time when the country and the city in particular was in a recession. So I knew there were going to be no jobs when I finished. So while I was in school, I applied to go to business school. And also I got into Stern at NYU. And so the business school thing was really more of a backup plan, if you will. And also at the time, I had moved from Alabama, and I began to hear about this thing called investment banking. And there are all these people my age making, at the time, was a lot of money, like making $100,000, I was like, what is this investment banking thing? And how can I get some of that? So really, truly, whereas my undergraduate degree and my the real estate degree were things that I really, truly loved and I was interested in, the business degree was sort of a backstop, as well as something to kind of get me into the door of this thing called investment banking, which I did actually. I got a summer internship at Smith Barney in corporate finance and hated it, absolutely hated it. So I was happy that I got the taste, but it just wasn't for me. So I chose, and I was living in New York. I wanted to stay in New York. It was really kind of that simple. And also, I had not had the opportunity to study abroad in undergrad. My school didn't have a study abroad program at the time, and NYU's business school did have a study abroad. So I did a semester in Copenhagen, which was really transformative.
Great. So did you start having to call the service when you first came into New York, or how? Help us out a little bit, or Sean, I'll let you ask questions
that's good.
on
That's
the
exactly
service
where I was
aspect.
going. Yeah.
So I think what I will say is that I personally define service very broadly, because the thing that I realized when I came to New York, I was working for the city, and I just met so many people. My supervisor at the time, the commissioner, et cetera, were really, really brilliant people who had terminal degrees in the law, or some cases working in economic development agencies. Someone might have a PhD in economics or a psychology degree. So these are really smart people who could have been in the private sector making a great deal more money, but they were really committed to working in the public sector. So when I talk about service, for me personally, it's not just about doing volunteer work, but it also includes working in the public sector or non-for-profit, particularly when you have a certain skill set and background that would allow you to go into the private sector and make more money. So I don't want to negate people's work and contribution in those ways. So for me, when you study urban planning, there definitely are consulting firms and things like that, but the bulk of an urban planning career is by definition working for city, state, or federal government. You're basically looking at, the thing I love about it is a very holistic degree. So you're looking at housing policy and economic development policy, transportation, taxation, how all these things work together to inform the urban environment. And at the time when I was looking to go to graduate school, the urban planning master's programs forced you to sort of pick one area, transportation, housing, what have you. And I literally could not pick, because I'm a generalist at heart, and so I couldn't wrap
Right. So just to kind of frame this a little bit, because we're always short on time here.
Absolutely.
Is that you thought about service being in the public sector, using your skill base, eyes wide open, that you would perhaps accept less monetary sum than going into the private sector. Now fast forward, you're a real estate broker as well, and a successful one at that. So tell us a little bit about like what charities are you involved in now, and how did you get on? I believe you're on the board of a charity, and how does that work? And how, like, tell us about that service.
Sure. So I just will say one quick thing going back. I did start volunteering. I want to say it was around 1993. The first group I volunteered for was the Gay and Lesbian Anti-Violence Project. I also volunteered for the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation. And I at one point did freelance fundraising. And so I worked with a lot of LGBT organizations like Lambda Legal Defense and Education Fund. So that allowed me to be in this milieu where I came to understand how not-for-profit organizations work and what they need and what they do. So, and then I went on to work at the New York Public Library and John Jay College of Criminal Justice. So I'm currently on the board of New York City's LGBT Center. I'm the co-chair of the nominating committee, and I'm also, I work on this sort of a temporary group that works with the archives at the center, which I think is very important. I think anytime you have marginalized groups, it's really important for them to collect and capture their cultural patrimony, if you will, so that we can have that history. It's very important to me. And then I'm also on the Racial Equity Working Group, which is something I'm really, really excited about. And that's something we've just started on the board. The center itself has been doing, the staff has been doing the racial equity work for about 1.5 years now. And now it's a group on the board. And then the entire board is going to take up this work starting Saturday, actually.
So one thing I want to ask, I mean, one of the purposes of when I was thinking about, well, what are we going to talk about? I'm glad you're going to be on the show. And then we, talked about service and servicing the community and this. How do you inspire other people? I mean, if the takeaway from this show is to get involved, how do you say you inspire other people locally, the people that are watching, or encourage other people to get involved where they are and what they can do to be a part of the community, to service the community?
That's a good question. I think that the first thing is to understand that you can serve in many different ways. Writing a check is important. So I don't people shouldn't say, "Oh, I just don't want to write a check." Yes, you should write that check. No.
Can I just say, Martin writes a lot of checks.
Did.
Martin does give a lot to different charities, and I just want to give you a shout out because you do, honey.
And that's
thank you.
Really important. And I will say, to the extent that you know an organization, you feel comfortable with the way that it's run and what they do, please give to their annual fund, as opposed to, the more restrictive you make your gift. If you want to make it restricted to a certain thing, that's fine. But if you know the organization and trust them, just give to their annual fund and trust that they will do what they need with the money. Because sometimes you might need, new toilets. No one wants to fund that, but the organization still has to figure out how to pay for it. So just give to the annual fund and let them figure out what they need, how best to utilize it. So anyway, just understand that there are many different ways you can support an organization, and then think about the things that you really care about. For me, I prefer to do work that addresses the root cause. I don't necessarily always sort of do my volunteering around that, but if I had a choice, and someone said, okay, here's hunger, you can, volunteer at a soup kitchen, which is great, which I've done. But you can also look at this thing over here. This organization is sort of trying to get at the root causes of hunger so we can end hunger. My heart is much more towards that, because I feel that ultimately, if we were able to do that, then the other problem would be solved. But some people are the exact opposite. Some people want that direct service, which is very, very important. So I think, board membership is another way you're sort of at a higher level. It's a lot of fundraising. It's a lot of sort of policy kind of work and supporting the executive staff and whatnot. But just figure out that the issues that are important to you. You don't have to stay with it forever. Your interests might change, but however and wherever you want to give, it will be welcomed by those different organizations.
So you're saying the first thing you should do is identify an organization that speaks to you.
Or identify an issue that speaks to you.
An issue, okay.
And identify organizations that address that issue, yes.
And you were going to say something, Martin?
Yeah, I was. The other thing I thought was great that Reginald said was that, have, what interests you, and those, once you have a cause that you like, there's more than just one area to help the cause, right? So for example, you mentioned hunger as a point, and if you want to, everybody needs help in soup kitchens, and God's Love We Deliver, I volunteered at for a while, right? Everybody, there's something wholesome and cathartic of preparing freshly made food for people in need, which I think is great. Other people, which I know Sean is a party guy, party planner. He would be great at the planning, the annual gala, right? Yeah. The party planning aspect of it, and you need all of those things from my perspective in order to make a charity work. So it doesn't necessarily have to be something. You should make it fun for yourself, I think. Yeah. As well. Would you not agree to have it? And if that enthusiasm shines through, if you're doing something that you like, that probably would inspire others too, I would think.
I agree. I always think about it, even in real estate, I think about people having cocktail conversations. And so if excited about the way in which you are involved in something. When you go and have cocktail or dinner with someone, you're going to be talking about it because it's exciting to you. And yes, that will, inspire other people, I think.
Yeah, I think it's important to keep other people inspired. And as talking about service today and getting people involved, give us some of the charities. I mean, we're going to have some link to this talk when we put it online. But can you just give us some of the charities that you are close to, that you want to give a shout out to, that you work on or either donate to?
So the one that I'm closest to, I think it's obvious, is the one on whose board I sit, the LGBT Center, which is gaycenter.org. We do so much in the community. I do want to highlight our program that works with young people who are dealing with addiction. It was the only, it might still be, but when we started it a few years ago, it was the only program working with LGBT youth who are dealing with this issue. It got a lot of attention because this is a huge problem. A lot of young people in our community are, not accepted by their families. If you look at homeless youth, a lot of them are LGBT. All these issues are really connected. So that's just something that I'm really proud of. And again, we do so much, it would be hard for me to really capture it all. But another organization that I wanted to talk about that's new to me, I have not supported them, but I want to spotlight trans women in particular Black trans women, but the entire trans community is really suffering right now. It has been suffering for a long time. So many Black trans women were fatally killed that the American Medical Association declared it an epidemic. I mean, think about that. If that same statistic were applied to white freshman women in college, the world would stop and we would figure out what the problem is. But Black trans women are on the margin of the margin of the margin of society. So one of the things I like to challenge myself to do, which I challenge other people to do, is to work on behalf of someone who's really who may not look like you, and if you help them, you don't necessarily think it's helping you, although it is, because everyone needs help, and this is a community that doesn't have access to the resources that other communities have. So it behooves all of us as human beings to really understand their plight and to do something about it. The other organization, the last one I wanted to talk about, was the Equal Justice Initiative. I think Sean, you did you go to the lynching museum in Alabama? Did your son go? Or you have not been?
Yeah, I don't think it was there yet.
I don't think we went to that one.
Rights museum. Right. We did, Martin, or did we not?
No, we did not. We saw the one in Jackson, Mississippi.
Right. So the Equal Justice Initiative itself basically is working to address the issue of mass incarceration, which, if you read, there's a lot of literature out there now. Like the new Jim Crow is the one that really kind of speaks to the connection most directly between slavery and mass incarceration being the legacy of slavery. And they kind of work to kind of dismantle this system. But then a few years ago, they founded a lynching museum, which apparently is really, really powerful. It's in my home state of Alabama, but I have not been able to go yet. So I wanted to bring people's attention to them as well.
Oh, great. I have a question or two, and then Sean, I'll let you, because I know that we're, again, this half hour always goes so fast.
And we have left, I think, 6 minutes.
Okay, so what happens? And I read about a charity, I'm excited, I think it's a fit, and I get in, and it's not at all what I expected it to be, and I'm not having fun with it. Am I still morally obligated to be involved with this charity, or do I talk to somebody, or do I, look for something else? Like what do I do in that situation?
I think your obligation is to speak to someone, because if you came to this organization because you're passionate about an issue and it seemed like they were addressing the issue, but something is amiss, there may be a very logical reason. It could be a misunderstanding on your part, where there could be some really critical thing, but actually an easy thing that you may be able to solve. A lot of times with the really small organizations, they're founded by someone who's extremely passionate, but doesn't necessarily have the capacity or the resources to be as professional as we want them to be. So maybe they simply need to be connected to a foundation that gives grants for capacity building. So I wouldn't dismiss the passion and whatever necessarily. I would definitely ask questions before you move on.
Okay, fair enough. And when I first moved to New York, there was New York City actually had you could make an appointment and they would go over a number of different charities to be involved with, which I thought was great. And I ended up being a docent at the Whitney for a while. Is there some, I don't even know if that's still around, but do you know of any like central volunteer aggregators or something that you could go to?
Was that New York Cares?
Maybe. I mean, it could have been, this was.
I think it was New York Cares, which is a nonprofit. It's not part of New York per se. I don't know if they're still around or not.
Oh yeah.
So let me just say, Alex Magoob said it's New York Cares, and Alex also said something that I thought was very powerful and meaningful, and just asking people to get involved and help the marginalized. I think that's awesome. But continue. Thank you, Alex. But go ahead, continue about New York Cares.
I know that I think he was just asking were they still around, and Alex just confirmed that they are. So, but that's a great idea.
So we only have 3 minutes left, and I kind of want to end on a high note. And Martin, you brought up your volunteer work, and one of the things I want Reginald to talk about, I'm putting him on the spot, is he did volunteer work, or he was a docent for Grand Central Station. So you have to tell us just a couple of unknown things about Grand Central Station that you pointed out that people may not know because they have not taken the tour.
Okay, so I volunteer under the auspices of the Municipal Art Society, which is an organization that advocates for intelligent urban design. And as part of that, they train us to be docents at Grand Central Terminal, which is one of my favorite buildings in New York City. And we use that tour money to help support the Municipal Art Society. So one quick thing I'll say is, at Grand Central, we like to say it's where time began. So prior to, I'm sorry, it's been so long since the pandemic, since I did a tour, I've forgotten some of this thing. But I think it was before 1918, there was no standard time in the United States. So every town and every state had its own clock. They had some whistle or whatever, and that was fine as long as there were no trains traveling on the same track. As train travel began to grow, this became a growing problem, and an accident was bound to happen. So finally, the government decided to standardize time, and everyone thought this was like Y2K, their Y2K. You're fooling around with God. You can't do this. It was a huge, huge thing. So nobody knew what was going to happen. So they set aside a certain day. I want to say it was November the 18th. I can't remember. Sorry. To say at this time we're all going to move to standard time based off of the atomic clock at the Naval Observatory, and everyone's going to switch to the same time or be on the same times in these different zones. Well, at Grand Central, they thought if this goes wrong, it's going to go really wrong because we have hundreds of trains coming in. So they started it, I think, 10 minutes earlier than the set aside time, just to and obviously nothing happens, we know. But anyway, so that's why we say this is Grand Central Terminal is where time began. I know it's a weird example, but it's one of
Oh, that's awesome. Well, Alex also just said something about Joe Biden and uses that quote, I guess.
Oh, really? I don't know.
What is the quote, Jerry? Can you read it to us?
Yeah, Alex typed it in the notes.
So here's the thing about life. There's no accounting for what fate will deal you. Some days when you need a hand, there are other days when we are called to lend a hand. That's how it has to be. That's what we do for one another.
Perfect.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Alex.
Nice.
That's great.
That's awesome. I thought it was about time, but that's even better.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought it'd be a great way to kind of wrap up everything with, if you can give a hand, give a hand. And if you need a hand, take a hand. Let's all be there for each other and help out, and protect those that are in need. It's a hard time for a lot of us. So love the interview. Well done.
Oh, thank you guys. Well, that's the end. And I want to say to people, go out, get involved, and allow people to lean on you. And you lean on somebody. As Bill Withers says, lean on me. So thank you again. very much, Reginald. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Jared. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Whit. The Martin Eiden team. Ask the Expert. Please join us next week where we'll have someone else on. And you get the last word, Reginald. Go.
Oh my God. I just want to say thank you. And by the way, any comments I've made are mine alone and not necessarily a reflection of the brokerage with whom I am currently affiliated.
Excellent.
Fair enough. All right. Thanks a lot, guys.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Brittany. Brittany tuned in. She was looking fabulous.